Alright, so with another semester in the rear view now, it is time to get right back at it on the channel. What's good, everybody? It's been a minute, but I am back, and it's about time that I got going with my off-season videos. And the first order of business is my season reviews. In the interest of making up for lost time, as well as a bit of laziness on my part, this year I decided that instead of going through individual videos, I was just going to do it in a more rapid-fire type of way, where I just go through the top 8, assess their seasons, and give my thoughts in as concise a fashion as possible. So without wasting any more time, let's start at the top. Carlos Alcaraz. The Alcaraz storm was brewing at the back end of last season. He was in prime position to take a leap, and did he ever? I think, a lot of people expected a leap to come, but not one as big as ending the year number 1. And yes, some unique circumstances this year did contribute to that. It's one of the lower point totals you'd see that would finish number 1, but nonetheless, the dude was skyrocketing up the rankings from the beginning of the season. I expected top 10 by the end of the year. I expected top 8 by the end of the year. He was already top 8 by spring, early spring. And when you look at the season that Alcaraz put together, it was absolutely exceptional. To the naked eye, regardless of result, really his only poor patch of play this season came in a short stint between Wimbledon and the US Open, up until Canada, really. And then, for obvious reason, he seemed a little burnt out by the end of the year after that grueling US Open run, which of course was the crowning jewel of his season. Honestly, I felt Alcaraz played better in the spring than he did to win the US Open. But whether his game, which is so entertaining, was firing on all cylinders or not, all year he showed so many champion qualities. The mental fortitude, the physical endurance, which shined through the US Open. All of these qualities shine through, and not to mention he dazzled us from a tennis standpoint as well. Turned so many matches into contenders for match of the year this season. And obviously, he is well beyond his years. The kid is electric. It does feel like the durability might be something to keep an eye on heading into next year, as he ended this season kind of beat up. Another year of familiarity on grass, as well as, continuing to just improve that serve, will serve him well heading into next year. But otherwise, Alcaraz gets an A for this season, probably put together the most consistent and complete season of anyone on tour this year across both the Slams and the ATP Tour. And coming in at the number 2 slot, we had Rafael Nadal. If I could say one thing about his 2022 season, it's that it was for sure a tale of two halves. Obviously, up through the first half and through Wimbledon, we saw a magical run for Nadal in his age 36 season. 2 major runs at Australia and Roland Garros that, will be etched into his career highlight reel forever when he hangs it up. 2 very impressive major runs that I have said my piece on throughout the course of this year. Obviously, mixed in there, you had a 20-match win streak to begin the year. And heading into Wimbledon, it really looked like Nadal did have a chance to chase the calendar slam as Djokovic did the year prior. Obviously, it was his first time on the grass since 2019, and, while he started slow, by the second week, Nadal really was beginning to come into form. Advanced to the semi, of course, but in the process, he did end up sustaining an ab tear. And that's pretty much all she wrote for the positives from Nadal's 2022. Up to this point, as a Rafa fan, I can say that sentiment among the fan base did seem like it didn't really matter to us if he did anything the rest of the year, considering what a magic carpet ride the beginning of the year had been. But I can also say that I did not anticipate reality not being that far off from him really doing nothing the rest of the year. That ab tear stuck around, was eventually re-aggravated, and really limited any impact that he could have post-Wimbledon. 4 match wins in as many tournaments played post-Wimbledon. And that really makes this season, as memorable as it was for Rafa, a weird one to evaluate. He played great in patches, but also was still a pretty injury-riddled season, and it feels like those niggling injuries seem to be a given for Nadal as he goes through these latter years of his career. I do think that moving forward, he should schedule a bit smarter, stop playing the Acapulco tournaments of the world, as well as not loading up and playing a full clay court season anymore. But still, with 2 majors in your age 36 season, you will take that any day of the week. And just off the back of those 2 majors, I give Rafa Nadal an A for his 2022. Up next, our number 3 for the year in Casper Ruud. First and foremost about Ruud's 2022, he way overshot expectations is what I can say. As it is, the discourse around him was, 250 merchant. He only really is a factor on clay in spite of the fact that at the back end of last year, he had made Turin and made the semifinals last year. And this year, he more than showed all those results at the end of the year were not flukes. In fact, if anything, he one-upped them considerably this year as, his top 3 finish really wasn't propelled by the 250s, 500 smaller events. In fact, his performance in those smaller events dropped off from what they were a year ago, but to make up for it, the deep runs across surfaces, particularly clay and hard, as well as being very consistent in the bigger events for much of the year. That's really what contributed to his ranking finishing so high, and notable results include final in Miami, semi in Rome, semi in Canada, of course the 2 major finals of the French and the US Open, and then to finish the year going 1 deeper in Torino, making the final there with a couple of great wins. We can acknowledge that I think that some places, particularly his major final runs, the draw did open up for him, but it's not like it was for a lack of signature wins this season or that he looked out of place when he made it that deep. The only time it did, that was courtesy of Rafa in the French Open final, who has made many a man look that way. Add on the fact that visually, it looked very clear. His serve got better, his backhand got better, even within the year. So for Casper Ruud, also a big step forward in 2022. I'm giving him a B, and he deserves major props for the season he was able to put together, well beyond my expectations for him. Up next at number 4, we had Stefanos Tsitsipas. From the beginning of this year, I had been talking about an observation where I felt that there was quite a bit of discrepancy between the results that Tsitsipas was putting together and his actual form to the eye test, because, there's a justifiable reason behind it. Obviously, he ended 2021 quite rocky in spite of the great year that it was for him, and that can be marked up to the elbow injury he was carrying. And, it bothered him so much so that he had surgery in the off-season, and that definitely looked like it had its impact. I would say that Steph did not look himself all the way through the French Open. There's something to be said that's very commendable about still being able to rack up as many wins and be as consistent as he was in spite of that. His physicality and, how great a competitor he is are 2 of his best qualities, and I think those were the biggest contributors to that. But watching him, he just didn't look like he was flowing the same way he was a year ago, in spite of arguably putting up better results leading into the French Open, where this year he had a great opportunity to go back to the final. The draw was pretty wide open for him, but he just did not have the level. Grass season, I think, was a bit of a turning point for his year. He played a lot better, in my opinion. Had his best grass season of his career to this point. Got a title in Mallorca. And played a pretty good match against Kyrgios. Just a tough draw to get him in the 3rd round there. He had a great win over Daniil Medvedev in Cincinnati. He's beginning to turn that matchup around. Beat him in Cincy and then the Tour Finals. Also, after having success against Djokovic early in their head-to-head, he has mightily struggled against Novak of late, and a couple of big spots down the stretch of this season. He played Novak quite tough in Turin, and particularly Paris almost got the better of Novak in that match, and it was very high quality. And all in all, with the way he closed this year, I think there's quite a bit to be encouraged about for Tsitsipas' 2023 prospects. But as far as just this season is concerned, in spite of the tour leading amount of wins, I can't give this season any higher than a C+. I thought his play in finals lacked quite a bit to be desired for the most part, and his major results being semi-final, 4th round, 3rd round, and 1st round. At number 5 this year we had Novak Djokovic, and let's just get it out of the way. That number next to his name by no means reflects where he stands in the tennis world to this day. In fact, with the way that he closed this season, he is probably most people's choice as the best player in the world still at this present moment. On account of numerous factors, it took a while for his 2022 to get going. First and foremost of those reasons being, of course, the inability to enter into any tournaments really up until February in Dubai. Extremely unfortunate state of affairs in Australia for him to kick off the year. On this front, all I'll say here before getting to his actual season is that I do feel that mistakes were made on both sides as far as the Australian Open debacle was concerned, but ultimately I do think that it's fair to say that Djokovic was made an example out of. The flip-flopping after granting him a medical exemption on the part of the Australian government was just a mess. Now, initially I did feel like the specifics of said medical exemption seemed kind of murky on Djokovic's end, but that exemption was approved by a double-blind medical panel, so I'm not going to sit here and try and argue against that. Anyways, once Djokovic's season got going, took a while for him to get his legs back underneath him, struggled all the way through Belgrade, and then from Madrid on, he just seemed to get better and better. From that point on, it very much seemed like Novak Djokovic resembled the player that won 3 slams the year prior. At Wimbledon, it seemed like the baton for the leading man for the year got handed from Nadal to Djokovic. He took total control in the second half of the year. I thought that his level at Wimbledon was his best since 2018. Matches like Sinner and Kyrgios, their level would have been good enough to beat most guys, but Djokovic certainly doesn't fall in that category. Of course, after that, unable to participate in North America. After that, a well-rested Novak Djokovic pretty much did what I think most people expected from him, and that was almost sweep the indoor hardcourt season. And in spite of that being the expectation, you have to, give props to what he was able to do in limited action this year. Didn't get as many bites at the apple as would be typical, but still came away with 3 big titles and brimming with confidence heading into 2023. North America might still be up in the air, but hopefully he's back to a more normal calendar by then. But for 2022, Djokovic gets an A. At number 6, we had Felix Auger-Aliassime. 2022, I would say, was a big year in Felix's progression. Ever since he broke through in early 2019, it did seem like in the years following he had stagnated, if not taken baby steps at the end of last year. However, 2022, although not the monumental leap that it looked like it could have been at the beginning, still ended up being a pretty big step forward. Second half of 2021, Felix had started getting his first deep major results, and he carried that over into 2022, started the year in exemplary fashion, pushed Daniil Medvedev to the absolute brink in one of the matches of the year in the Australian Open quarterfinals, followed it up, finally getting the monkey off his back in Rotterdam, finally winning a title, having not converted in all his past finals appearances. And at that point, you were wondering if this could be the arrival of Felix Auger-Aliassime. And he didn't really play great again until Rome, played a very good match with Djokovic there. And then in Paris, he had another similarly encouraging loss, pushed Rafael Nadal 5 sets on Chatrier. Need I say more? And with that result, considering that he has shown to be one of the few young guys that has seemed kind of comfortable on the grass, I really was expecting big things from him on the grass. And yet again, similar to the beginning of the year following Australia, he kind of went AWOL, didn't really play well again until the indoor swing. Early exits at both Wimbledon and the US Open, before closing the year red hot for the most part during the indoor swing. 2 more titles there, secured a spot in the World Tour Finals, and with that body of work, you would absolutely say that this year was a pretty big net positive for Felix. Best season of his career so far, and relative to his expectations, he gets a B. You're left with a situation here where it seemed like his peaks got higher when he was on. He's right there with the best in the world, but there's still too big a gap between his best tennis and when he's off. And I think it's going to be all about closing that gap for FAA. At number 7, we had Daniil Medvedev, and, straight off the bat, it's very strange to see Medvedev that low in the rankings. This was very clearly his worst season ever since he broke through in 2019. That's something that would have been hard to believe at the beginning of the year, considering how he finished 2021, brimming with confidence, fresh off of his first major title at the US Open. Looked to be in pole position to take the number 1 spot at some point, and once Djokovic was unable to play, Australia seemed to be the favorite for most to take the title there. It ended up being a pretty grueling Australian Open run, but it still seemed like business as usual all the way up through 2 sets to love and 3 break points to go ahead in the third of the Aussie Open final. Of course, we know he was unable to close that deal, and that had to be an absolutely devastating blow. That's the kind of loss that can loom psychologically for a while after. And while I do think that did end up being the case to an extent, I still do want to highlight other factors that definitely contributed to Medvedev's season panning out the way it did. His early season exploits still ended up getting him a brief stint at number 1, fabulous achievement, but shortly after, it was revealed that he would need hernia surgery. Came back for a very truncated clay court season that you don't really expect much from him anyways. That silly Russian ban at Wimbledon followed after that. All the while, since early spring, of course, the Russia-Ukraine conflict had been something that I know weighed on the Russian players. But the biggest surprise, I thought, was the North American hardcourt swing. That's a part of the season. Medvedev has been the best player in the world since he broke out, and yet that still didn't reinvigorate him. Watching his matches, he still wasn't at the level of years past, and he was right there for the taking, even during that swing. What followed, I think, was an okay indoor season. Thought it could have been better, but I did see enough glimpses of, I thought, Daniil at or near his best during the indoor swing to say that I think he'll have a bounce-back year next season. 2022, though, not up to Medvedev's standards. He gets a C-. And finally, we have Andrei Rublev, who finished number 8. Rublev has been a mainstay in the top 8 ever since 2020. Just another really solid year for Andrei. It felt like he got a lot more consistent again this year, more reminiscent of his 2020 rather than his 2021, where midway through it did seem like he was suffering a lot more losses to guys that you would expect him to beat. You have to note that he too was affected by that Wimbledon ban, of course, as well as the Russia-Ukraine conflict. But Rublev this year, as solid and consistent a year he had, I can't really say that this is anything we haven't seen from Andrei before. The one front where that's not true, actually, is I do feel that he got a lot more signature wins this year. Beat Medvedev again, beat Djokovic in the Belgrade final. Those are just 2 off the top of my head. Semis of the tour finals, but it has become clear that what you would like to see out of Rublev next, that would be getting some wins in these big spots. Rublev has already gotten himself to quarterfinals of majors. This year, it must be said that it took some inspired efforts out of Cilic at the French, and Frances Tiafoe playing the tournament of his life at the US Open. But ultimately, we're at a spot where still the upper end of his game is still kind of plateaued. Still a very good and consistent season, but this has pretty much become the norm for Rublev, and I do think this is a season that could have been even better for him. All these grades been relative to preseason expectations, so Rublev gets a B-. And before I wrap up the video, I do also want to make note and give shout-outs to players who I think made leaps in 2022 and were very much in this mix. Taylor Fritz deserving of ultimately getting to play in Turin, great year. Holger Rune, the other teenager that made some noise this year. Alexander Zverev, when we last saw him, sustained that nasty injury, but also is playing his best tennis of the year. If he can recover from that, he probably will be back in the top 8 next year. I do not think that PCB, Borna Coric, or Francis Tiafoe will be in this mix next year, but I do want to give them shoutouts for their heaters during the North American hardcourt swing at Montreal, Cincinnati, and the US Open respectively. Cam Norrie, I think, has slightly more scope, and I do want to give him credit. I think he got better this year in spite of the Masters title and actual tournament appearance coming last year. He too, alongside Kyrgios and Djokovic, probably were the biggest casualties of the Wimbledon no points rule this year. You move on to the two Italians, both suffered terrible injury luck this season. Yannick Sinner, also, for anyone that watched him when he was healthy this year, I felt clearly got better. Matteo Berrettini, also after Australia, terrible injury luck. Both guys I do think will be in this mix next year if they can stay a bit healthier. And lastly, a bit of a wild card in Nick Kyrgios. I did not expect him to ever be in this conversation, but here he is. He definitely had the best year of his career in 2022 by a country mile. If this apparent more dedication is sustainable, I also think, given his gifts, he will absolutely be in contention for the top 8, as he should have been this year. But that concludes all the shouts I wanted to give for the 2022 season. That will do it for this video. Thank you so much. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, it would be much appreciated if you could drop a like on the video, help it perform better in YouTube's algorithm, and subscribe to the channel if you are not already. Thank you again so much for watching, and of course, I will see y'all in the next one.